And now to another hot topic. The decision by Slovakia and Hungary to stop supplying diesel to Ukraine has sparked heated discussions. Are we facing a shortage and will prices skyrocket? The information noise instantly became as loud as the roar of generators that run on diesel. Let me remind you, Budapest and Bratislava have stopped supplying diesel fuel until Kyiv resumes the transit of Russian crude oil through the pipeline. Druzhba. So will the Ukrainian market suffer? Who stands to gain and who will lose from the suspension of supplies? Our Yulia Chekicina investigated.
This is the Druzhba oil pipeline. Russian oil flows through it to Hungary and Slovakia. The pipeline was damaged back at the end of January. So due to the damaged infrastructure, it is difficult to restore the flow. In turn, Budapest and Bratislava accused Kyiv of deliberately delaying the restoration of transit.
We have information that the oil pipeline was supposed to be repaired. I perceive what is happening with the oil today as political blackmail against Hungary because of its uncompromising stance on Ukraine's EU membership.
Yesterday, Hungary and Slovakia halted diesel fuel exports to Ukraine until the pipeline is restored. Ukraine's foreign ministry spokesperson noted that the Hungarians' unwillingness to end their reliance on Russian oil is at odds with the European Union's position. And I quote, "It resembles an addiction."
There is the Adria oil pipeline, which is fully ready for use, and there are no technical reasons for these countries to remain dependent on Russian oil. For these countries, none exist. But unfortunately, we do not see even attempts to break free from dependence on Russian oil. On the contrary, quite the opposite. In the policy of the European Union, we see attempts to stay on this needle for as long as possible. And
experts see such actions by Budapest and Bratislava as signs of blackmail towards Kyiv.
The political leaders who are currently in power are persistently manipulating, let's put it that way, by employing various economic levers and pressures against Ukraine because they are politically motivated in this way. And they have turned out to be economically dependent on the supply of Russian hydrocarbons.
This is not the first time that the supply of diesel has been stopped, but previously this was due to other reasons.
The last such incident took place during the fall of 2025, which was only a few months ago, occurring as a direct result of an accident at the Hungarian oil refinery. Consequently, at that time, fuel supplies were completely halted for several weeks. Nevertheless, this did not have a particularly significant impact on the overall market.
Andriy Zakrevsky shares the same opinion. According to him, Ukraine imports a total of 800,000 tons of diesel fuel. Of this amount, Hungary and Slovakia supply only 40,000 tons. This accounts for just 5% of the market.
We have the capability to supply from Poland and we have the capability to supply from Romania. Accordingly, this volume will be quite easy to cover.
Experts assure that even if 40% of supplies are lost, the Ukrainian diesel fuel market will not suffer. After all, the system itself is built in such a way that there are enough supply sources.
The supply of petroleum products in Ukraine is now so diversified that the loss of perhaps 40% of the supply system will not lead to anything significant. Right now, our supply is as diversified and balanced as possible.
Drivers are most interested in the price. The finance ministry says a liter of diesel costs nearly 61 hryvnias, and since late January, the price has fluctuated by 40 kopecks. Serhiy Kuyun assures no price hike is expected soon.
A price increase can only happen if there is a shortage. And as I already said, there will be no shortage as a result of the suspension of these supplies. Accordingly, as always, we will depend on two factors: global quotations and the exchange rate. And
if the Ukrainian market does not require rescue, there are doubts about the Hungarian one.
Slovakia and Hungary have exemptions from the European embargo on oil supplies. This agreement comes with the specific and mandatory stipulation that any and all fuel products they manage to produce from imported Russian crude oil can only be exported directly to the nation of Ukraine. That is, accordingly, if they are now trying to bring in Russian oil from the sea, for example, through Croatia, they will still have to look for a buyer. And the only buyer will be in Ukraine. There won't be any other.
As a result, Hungary will have to use its strategic oil reserves, transport Russian crude by sea, and pump it through Croatia. But the Minister of Economy of this country, Ante Șușniar, assured that they are ready to help with the transit. However, not with oil from the aggressor country. Currently, Hungary has already threatened to stop exporting electricity and natural gas to Ukraine. Yulia Chekicina, Alexander Kruglikov, details on Inter TV channel, United News Marathon.
Slovenia is threatening us. And Orbán, the Hungarian one, to stop the supply of diesel fuel and electricity. Because we don't want attention, we don't want to export Russian oil through the Druzhba pipeline, which was built by Russia. Please explain this game of the Russian Federation to me. Why did they attack their own refinery after all, leaving behind their strategic Trojan horses within the European Union? Without that cheap fuel, and as for Orbán, it is even worse. Just a little over a month and a half before the upcoming elections, right when he really needs that extra money to buy off his electorate with low prices at the local gas stations.
Well, I think it's quite a straightforward and simple calculation, basically shifting all the blame onto Ukraine, so to speak. When the Russians gave Orbán a card and at the same time effectively forced him to act tough. In other words, if he weren't in such a difficult and dire situation, maybe he wouldn't be so actively speaking out against Ukraine. Because he's under pressure from Europe, so to speak, and sometimes he would just pretend not to notice. It's not that he spoke in favor of Ukraine, he would simply leave the room when certain issues were being decided and those issues would get resolved. Well, he learned to live without Orbán. We saw that those 90 billion were voted on without Orbán, without Fico. Here's a loan to Ukraine at the expense of Russian money. But Putin is also putting pressure on Orbán to provoke him into taking more drastic actions. These are some very tough measures indeed. We can clearly see that the election campaign in Hungary is now well underway, featuring some very openly anti-Ukrainian rhetoric. Essentially, for Viktor Orbán, the main slogans are that Ukraine is a direct enemy that wants a state of decline for the country of Hungary. And he has built his entire election campaign on this.
But so far it hasn't helped him much. 10 points. He is losing to his opposition rival. And of course, it was very funny this week to watch how Trump made Rubio go on a campaign tour in support of Orbán. I can only imagine what kind of mood he was in while doing it. Rubio, but the thing is, I think this will help very little. I think Hungary, Budapest could become a real hotspot after the election because Orbán, let's be honest, he won't just give up power regardless of how he moves from falsification to more serious kinds of things.
Yes, it's a tense situation. We'll be watching, especially since it's close to us. It's on the European continent. So, for example, the impeachment of Trump. Trump also won't want to leave without an internal war. In the United States, everything is heading toward civil war. In fact, a civil war is already underway there. Because when certain police units in a state, aside from and against the governor's decision, arrive and start killing white Americans, that's a civil war. And it's happening in Congress, it's happening in the mass media as well. So in reality, there's already a slow-burning civil war going on in America, and it's been happening for a year now. And remember how Kirk was killed as well? It's all part of the same trend. And today, by the way, we were told that some guy with a shotgun ran into Congress again. They did detain him there, though. Well, apparently he was crazy or something, like it always happens in America. And it ended up being fine. He surrendered. But the simple reality is that in the United States of America, where there are several million or even tens of millions of firearms, this war could very easily turn into a bloody massacre at any moment. And the same kind of thing could happen in Hungary too, because even right here in the peaceful country of France, over the course of the past 3 full days, we have been dealing with a very similar case to that one. It is a case involving a young teenage neo-fascist who was killed by those very same Antifa members. And basically, it really seems like it was a violent clash between these two opposing groups. The left-wing Antifa movement, which many of us used to think of as just polite young boys wearing glasses, has transformed. They are now just as strong and physically muscular, and this applies to both the guys and the girls. Furthermore, they are fully ready, so to speak, on both sides of the political divide to physically start killing their opponents. And in fact, this exact kind of dangerous social tension is currently happening across Western Europe as well, too.
Yes, the world is slowly going crazy, but we've been observing this for quite some time already. It's all rather sad somehow.